This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders. Today I'm honored to have Dr. Angelique Adams on the show. She is an engineer and former corporate executive who's made the shift from developing products to developing people, which I think is pretty awesome. And we're going to talk a little bit about how leaders need to be focused about certain things. And, when it comes to presentations or especially in engineering, how you become a leader in engineering, which is all what this podcast is all about at geekleader.com. Anyway, with all that being said, Angelique, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
If you want to tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into helping people, and what that transition was like from engineering to people engineering.
Yeah. Oh, great. I like that. People engineering. So, as you said, I'm an engineer by background. I spent 20 years in the manufacturing industry and started as a technician, then went back to graduate school, then was in research and development, and then got into leadership myself, got into being a leader of engineers in innovation, strategy, operations, etc., and then ultimately became the chief innovation officer for the third largest stainless steel manufacturer in the world. And during that time, I really enjoyed developing the people on my own team. So I was teaching them how to present to executive leadership. I was teaching them about time management. I was teaching them about productivity. I was teaching them how to grow in their own careers as part of being their leader, because I saw that they really wanted that. They really responded well to that kind of coaching from me as their boss. And so the seeds of this sort of people development really started early on, and I was doing that for my own team. And then COVID hit, and I had gotten some encouragement from some classmates when I got an executive MBA later on in my career. And some of my classmates were like, you've really had an interesting career. You should write about your experiences. And at the time, it was a woman in a very male dominated industry. And I had just this, unique experience. And I thought, well, I don't have time. Who has time to write a book? And I don't have an interesting story. But then COVID hit, and I went from traveling 60% of my time to no travel. So I had all this quote unquote free time on my hands. And so I went ahead and wrote that book. And it did better than I ever could have expected. When it got published, it became an Amazon #1 bestseller very briefly, but enough to take a screenshot with the #1 on it so I could use it in my marketing. But to me, that was kind of like a market indication that maybe the people development work that I had been doing with my own team, as I was sharing that more broadly, maybe it resonated with people that weren't just people who knew me. And I thought, okay, well, the other thing that happened around COVID that I think a lot of people experienced was just this intense period of self-reflection. And so I thought, okay, I have really reached a very high level in the career trajectory that I had set out for myself way back in the day when I first started this whole thing. And I feel like I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. And now I feel this real strong pull towards focusing on the people development side of things. And so that's when I decided to kind of use my book as a springboard to become an entrepreneur and start my own leadership consulting business.
Awesome. And just on a personal note, was that shift away from, getting into entrepreneurship and starting your own thing? How scary was that?
Terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. Well, and I'll say it was terrifying, maybe not in the way people might think. So it was absolutely different to be thinking about being out on my own. Mm-hmm. But I've been in product development my whole career. So I was like, okay, this book, it's a minimum viable product. I'm going to put it out there. And so I was comfortable with that aspect of it, of creating courses, creating products and putting things out there. I was okay with that. one piece of it was very tactical, and it was like, I'm used to being an executive and having a staff of people to do things for me, and now I'm on my own. And the first time it really hit me, the first time I got paid to speak, I did it. I gave the presentation. Everybody was happy. And then like a week later, she was like, "Are you going to send me an invoice?" And I was like, "Oh, oh yeah, I don't have a procurement team that does all that." And of course, I mean, it takes you 2 minutes to Google how does, what is an invoice supposed to look like? And I made one. But that's when it really hit me that I was completely by myself, and I was had to do everything now. The part that was the most terrifying was this loss of identity that I had. I mean, I'd spent, as I said, over 20 years trying to become the chief innovation officer of something, and the status that went with that, and the frequent flyer miles, and the airport lounges, and the top floor of the hotel. I mean, I had achieved all of that, and I had fallen into the classic trap of wrapping my sense of self-worth in this corporate, this corporate role and this corporate title. And so when I shed that, I truly was like, I'm a nobody now. Like no one's going to want to talk to me. No one's going to want to hire me. Like, I'm not anything. And so it did take me a while to just readjust to this new identity, and how do I want to show up, and who am I? Who is Angelique if she's not chief innovation officer of this thing? That was really the terrifying part. I actually worked with a therapist, not specifically for that, but she actually helped me release staying where I was, because I probably should have left about a year before I actually did, but I couldn't, I couldn't give up the golden handcuffs. Those are really great things. And then she helped me, just sort of rebuild my confidence to, now I can show up now, and, I'm a leadership coach for engineers, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, no, I think, I have some of the same, fears and thoughts, especially like when I started this podcast, which you're going to be episode 400. So it's been a long time,
wow,
and, when I started this, I thought, well, nobody wants to talk to me, who wants to come on my show? And then when you have like, New York Times bestselling authors coming on, Navy SEALs coming on, it's like, oh, well, I guess it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me about, why someone with a PhD would need coaching and help, because, you're a doctor, you have everything together, right? Do you really need
Yeah, well, so that's part of the reason why we need coaching, because everybody thinks that we should have it all together. Well, so I mean, as you know, the skills and the strategies and the way that you show up as a leader are different from the things we do as a technical individual contributor.
Yes.
So those are two very different things. And people that have had this intense training, so on top of the, bachelor's level technical training, we've had more and more and more training. It makes us experts in very niche fields, but it also can sometimes give us this sense that only experts can do certain things. And so because we had no training on the leadership side of things, it can create this sense of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, real fear around trying these leadership behaviors because we are not experts, because we've been trained. The professional hazing associated with getting a PhD really jams into us that only experts are allowed to open their mouths. So there's that. And then I will say there, I feel like there's a lack of empathy with sort of the outside world into our plight about this self-consciousness and this self-doubt, because we know our stuff in so many other things. Mm-hmm. There's almost just this sense that, well, surely you understand that you have to have empathy for people. Surely you understand how that works. Like you're just being obstinate. It's not that you don't understand how it works and you don't feel comfortable doing it. It must be that you're just being obstinate. And so I think sometimes we get less grace or less leeway from business professionals when we don't immediately adopt these behaviors that seem to be so obvious to other people who have had exposure and training in those areas.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, just my experience with, being involved in technology, and, I teach at Winthrop University. So I've got, a higher education degree, actually a couple of them, and going through that process of, of, trying to learn leadership is a very different than learning your skills. And, for me, empathy is one of the things I struggle with. And, I have ADHD, and it's just one of those things with my neurodivergency that I'm a little bit off on empathy. Like somebody will tell me something that's really like emotional, and I won't like react because I hear the words, I understand it, but I haven't thought about it. I haven't processed it. And maybe later that day, I'll be like, holy crap, I probably should have like shown them a little bit of, grace here instead of just being like, well, you failed.
You suck.
Exactly. Yeah, so I find value in talking to someone to help me understand things, especially like looking back and reflecting on the areas that I messed up in and the areas that I'm weak in, because I am so strong in other technical areas, yet I'm weak in these areas. And I can go back to having a mentor when I first became a manager, and that mentor telling me like, you suck as a manager, and it like taking someone else telling me that to really click in and start saying, oh, I need to like focus on people skills and what people call soft skills, which I think they're very hard skills personally. So how have you been able to like help people that have, gone through their entire career and, through education that haven't needed these skills, and now they need them, and now they need to learn them, and they're kind of behind the eight ball trying to figure this stuff out. How do you go about, helping people realize that this is the path?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that, by the time people come to me, they typically recognize that they have some gaps. And so maybe they've had performance reviews where, things have been identified, or maybe they've taken some assessments and they recognize that they have these gaps in some of these leadership skills. So that's typically the first thing, is that they're coming to me saying, I need help and I don't know how to close these gaps. And so what I will do is really work with them, first of all, to prioritize what they want to work on. Yeah. But then I think one of the things there's maybe two approaches that I think really resonate with the scientists and engineers that I work with. So the first is to let's maybe demystify some of the language around some of these skills. And so sometimes things like empathy and charisma, and they're kind of woo-woo words a little bit. That makes people like me, I'll just speak for myself, just like say, I don't get it. And even when they describe those things, they describe them in very abstract ways, when in reality, there are some very concrete behaviors behind them. And one example that I like to tell is, so I was at a meeting, and everybody had gone to lunch, but I was still in one of the rooms, and somebody came in, he was wheeling his suitcase, and he was looking in the different rooms. And I said, hey, are you looking for us? He goes, yeah. And I said, we're down at lunch. And I showed him where it was. And then at the end of this 2-day program, he comes up to me and he says, wow, your empathy is off the charts. You just took such good care of me when you saw that I was, you saw that I was struggling, and you took such good care of me. And I looked at him and I smiled, and I'm thinking to myself, you just made this weird. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. But of course, I knew what he was talking about. What he was talking about is that, okay, I saw the pattern of somebody who looked lost, and I gave him instructions on where to find the people. That's a very concrete set of behaviors. If someone comes to you, looking sad or using certain words, you can ask them, how can I help you? And to us, it seems like it's a very straightforward, transactional. I may even have absolutely no emotional attachment to that. But to the other person, it's a completely different thing. Mm-hmm. And so helping people understand these very specific behaviors behind that. So charisma is about smiling, okay? And it's about asking people questions and following up, asking a follow-up question. I mean, those are the concrete behaviors behind that. So that's something that, that I think really resonates with people, when you can say, okay, if you want to get better at this, here's some behaviors. And then the other thing that I do is I say, let's design some experiments to actually test some of these behaviors, right? Because there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. Let's try on some behaviors that actually resonate with you. Because if I tell you this is exactly what you have to do in order to sort of check the empathy box, but it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel good to you, then it's not going to work. But in reality, there's a bunch of different behaviors that you could do. So why don't you run some experiments? And typically when people run experiments, they recognize, oh, that I didn't feel as bad as I thought I would. And the people that I'm trying to reach, like their whole face lights up there, or they'll start complimenting you on these soft skills or these behaviors that you had been lacking. And then, of course, that's a positive, feedback loop that will give you the confidence to keep moving in that direction. So those are the two ways that I approach that.
Yeah, I love the experiments thing. And, I can go back to when I was, early in my management career and managing people. I called my team, openly. I said, you guys are my lab. We're gonna experiment. We're gonna try things. I said, I am learning with you, and just made myself as vulnerable as possible at the time, which is super uncomfortable. But in doing so, like, they trusted me, and they realized, like, if this screwed up, they had the freedom to tell me, like, this is not working, and I would just, okay, well, good, that experiment didn't work. Let's document the next one and move forward. What kind of framework, or is there like a pattern or anything that you would recommend people when they're experimenting to, like, make sure they're paying attention to, or writing down, or noting? Because you kind of mentioned that they did this and person smiled, or they liked it. What kind of behaviors are they looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think when they're doing experiments, it depends on what they're testing. But just like you design any experiment, you can kind of think about, okay, well, what is it? What's the behavior I'm trying to change here, both for myself, but also in what kind of response am I trying to get? And then you can just try things and then see if you're getting the response that you're looking for. I think in general, what's helpful is to just have a sort of testing and feedback mindset that. I like weekly reviews. So every week, I kind of like to say, okay, what is it I'm going to try to accomplish, whether it be testing new behaviors, but it could also be, even projects that you're working on, you're trying to hit certain objectives, performance objectives, whatever it is. But if you just say every week, I'm just going to kind of, let's just see what went well and what do I need to take a look at relative to these things that I was trying to achieve and test over the previous week. I think if you just have that as a habit, then you can just embed all of these different, improvement techniques into your practice, and you'll find yourself moving forward, both with your own personal development, but also with anything you're trying to do with your team.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And I love having that feedback mindset, which is one of those things that I know when I first became a leader, and I was, I guess, insecure, maybe that's the right word, where I didn't want to get feedback because I didn't want people to think that I didn't know what I was doing and I wasn't in charge. And, having that mentor that was able to tell me, like, you've got to listen to your team. You've got, they know what they're doing. And I think the example he gave me at the time was, if I own a company and I have, 500 employees, am I going to go to my janitor and tell them what toilet bowl cleaner to use? No, I'm going to trust that they have that decision. And if I bought the wrong kind because I thought it was a little bit cheaper and he comes to me and tells me it's wrong, I need to trust that I made the mistake of buying the wrong kind, and now I need to follow up with that. And it's like, you need to do the same with your small team of 5 people. You got to have that same kind of response and feedback loop where you're paying attention to what they're saying, listening, and welcoming corrections instead of feeling insecure about those corrections.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And I think I would add to that as you ascend into higher levels of leadership, now you need to recognize that your peers are now people that can be giving you feedback, because now you have much, what you're accountable for has much broader impact across an organization. And so now you can't just go to your peer and expect to be able to tell them how things should be, that you now need to start getting input and feedback from them as well. And that's something that I had to learn. I had a boss, once I got sort of a director level, I had a boss who would have us come in, each director, and tell him about our strategy. And then he would decimate it. He'd pick it apart. And then he did that like 3 or 4 times. And we were all new directors at the time. We'd all get stressed out. And then finally I went in and I was like, here's my hypothesis. I'd like to get your input, the rest of your all's input on what I'm thinking. And he said, you finally got it. If you ever think you're going to sit in an executive level and know all the answers without getting, real good input from your peers, you're absolutely wrong. And so, I just think that, as you said about feeling like you have to know everything, you're going to have to shed that, not only with your own team, but with your peers, if you really want to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I first got into the executive level, I set up reoccurring meetings with all of our C-level team, just as one-on-ones, where I would go there and just say, tell me about like what you guys are working on and help me understand how I can be helpful for you. Help me understand what I need to get out of the way and what do I need to do, to learn your side of the business so I can support you better. And, just sitting there and the first couple of times, it was more just me listening than anything. And that's hard to do because, anybody that's, become a leader, become an executive themselves, they did that by making decisions and,
Right.
being vocal. And now you're sitting back and trying to listen and learn. It's a difficult thing, but it's an important thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say that, that's another area where I do think the technical experts that I work with really struggle, right?
Mm,
We were hired because we know how to get the right answer for very specific things. That's the entire reason why we were hired.
yeah.
And then as you shift, it's like, yeah, no, you do not need to be the smartest person in the room. You shouldn't be the smartest person in the room. And it's really hard to shed that.
Absolutely. Another question that I had for you was when it comes to, leaders in general, what are some of the reoccurring challenges that you see that technical leaders face as they move up in their career? Because like you said, we come in there, we're hired to make decisions, to give people answers. And as we move up, sometimes those skills become less and less important and new skills become more and more important. What are some of those skills that we need to focus on?
Focusing on communication, so both communicating more broadly and just as you said, really reaching, I would say maybe communication and what I call professional empathy, which is really just to say that your peers in sales and your peers in marketing and your peers in production and your peers in HR and legal and all of these people, they have very valuable contributions to the overall organization. They are not there just to do your bidding. And so you really need to recognize that their importance and learn to communicate with them, respect their processes and procedures and timelines and all of those sorts of things as you start to kind of put your own strategies together. So that's one area, because I do think when you start out highly technical, you have this very narrow field of view as to what's important, and oftentimes you get a lot of positive reinforcement that like the product and the technical challenges are often seen as some of the most important things to the business, and then you can kind of convince yourself that you're top dog in the organization, and then as you ascend you realize, oh no, it's not necessarily, that's not really the case at all, that it's much more of a collaborative environment, and then often really being able to communicate. If you're still technical, really being able to communicate what the technical team is doing, how they're solving problems in a way that resonates with the business. How is that translate into business objectives and solving key business problems and fitting with the overall strategy? So making that link, both so you can communicate with the broader organization, but also really bringing that back and helping your team to understand how what they're doing is impacting the overall business. So those are important skills. And then really building your professional network outside of just the technical side of things, really understanding customers and understanding externally and regulatory stakeholders, what depending on the industry, but really broadening instead of going deeper. I like to joke with, I say PhDs, they have PhD peers all over the world and they don't know who their HR rep is. Like that's just sort of how our professional networks evolve. And so you really have to go much broader than that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good, a good thing to do, because when you go broad, then you kind of learn more about all the little aspects within the business that are there and all the nuances and needs, and how important like the legal department is and how important, accounting is,
Right.
Instead of just thinking about technology or engineering. So I think that's very important as well. One of the things when you're talking about communication and helping us as technical folks, translate that technical speak into business speak. One of the ways that I know we do that is through presentations. We have to make presentations. What are some ways that we can make impactful presentations to business leaders that aren't too techy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I spend a lot of time working with folks on this. So I think that the first thing I like to tell people to do is to really think about who your audience is. And if your audience members are not people that are in your project meetings, then we're not going to talk technical hardly at all. We're really going to translate everything that we do into language that they care about. So if you're talking to your peers inside your organization, then you're going to translate it into business language. If you're talking to the media, you're going to maybe translate that into even more layperson's language. But you're going to take kind of the core things that most technical people talk about, like the problems that we're solving and the solutions that we have and the next steps and how things work. You can take all those building blocks and just literally sit down and change all the jargon into real words, change all the technical terms into real words, change all of the units of measure into basic units of measure. So if you just kind of start there with this kind of translation, and then you can kind of figure out the best way to organize that information. And I think it's great to, depending on what kind of presentation you're doing, it's great to talk to people who might be in the audience or talk to people who have presented to those people before and get some inputs about what's worked well and what hasn't worked well. What do you think their priorities are? And then adjust your presentation accordingly. But again, you're working with layperson's language. You've left all the technical language on the cutting room floor or in a separate presentation. And that tends to create a lot of anxiety. But I tell technical experts, if somebody asks you a technical question, you can answer it. It's not like you forgot it. It's just not on these slides. Okay. So it's not like nobody's going to think that all of a sudden you don't have a PhD anymore. So it's okay. But if you confuse them on your first slide, they're not going to care at all about what you have to say. And so your job is to create curiosity so that they ask you those follow-up questions, but also to tell them the information that they care about. And so that's kind of how we work on the presentations. The other thing I like to really suggest people do is spend a good amount of time prepping for Q&A. I think that lots of times people will spend a lot of time on their slides, even potentially do a really good job there, and then immediately default to some really bad habits when the Q&A comes, and then you lose people again because you can't answer questions in a way that they can understand. So the main strategies are, first of all, be real clear about who's in the room. 90% of the time, technical people are not talking to other technical people. So if they're not in your project meetings, then you have to come up with a different type of presentation, translate all of that language, and then organize it in a way that resonates with your audience, and then get some input, learn from people who've presented before, or talk to the people who's organizing the meeting and ask them, what are their priorities? What do you think they'll want to hear? And then adjust accordingly and be ready to answer questions.
Yeah, I like what you said about the Q&A, because I've been to so many presentations where they took out the acronyms, and they made things be, very, I like to call it kid friendly. I want to be able to give my presentations to a 10-year-old and they fully understand what I'm saying. So they made it like that. And then as soon as the first question is there, all the responses are back. The acronyms are there. And you're like, well, I don't understand what that means. I don't know what, that acronym stands for, because you never used it anywhere before. Now you're answering questions with it. So I think that's a really good thing to help people target on.
Yeah. And I think, with the AI, there's no excuse for not having some answers to some potential questions at the ready, right? I mean, because you can just plug in, I'm giving a presentation on this topic to these people. What are some questions they might ask me? There's no excuse at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I use ChatGPT sometimes before I have, a conversation with somebody, and just say, like, if I told someone this, how do you think they would respond? And somebody's like, oh, well, maybe I should soften the edges a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, it's really helpful, especially on one-on-ones as well, because sometimes as a leader, when you're giving a one-on-one, you can be either too soft or too hard. And I find it really difficult for me to get right in that balance where I'm giving somebody constructive feedback, but not hurting their feelings. Yeah. And, it's a challenging place to be, but ChatGPT has helped me a lot in that, just by being able to type in some of the things that I would probably say and get feedback, and then maybe either soften some of those things, or it's usually soften some of those things. Let's just go there.
Well, and you may or may not be surprised to know this. So I give very terse, biting feedback occasionally, because I think it's warranted. And sometimes I either don't want to or just can't filter it out. But at least for me, because I'm constantly in communication with my team and I'm constantly both helping them grow and giving them, positive reinforcement as needed when those sort of like, you just royally messed this up. Do not do it again. And here's why. They're like, thank you for that feedback, Ashley. Like, okay. So I think everybody does some of that.
Yeah, sometimes when I give very direct feedback, I'll get like the response like, "Oh, you're the gray troll today."
Gray troll. Okay. Well, I don't know what they called me behind my back. Who knows?
At least they're telling me to my face, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This has been really good, and I really appreciate your honesty and opening up and some of these things, especially things that we as leaders kind of struggle with. I do have one more question about your transition in life. You recently became a professor. Tell me a little bit about that transition and why you're doing that. I'm an adjunct professor, and I've been teaching at the college level for about 15 years, part time, and it's not something I could ever do full time. I don't think. I used to do it full time, and I moved away from it. I really like the part time approach just because of not having, I don't know, research to do.
Yeah.
But tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I did not see academia coming at all. I mean, I really thought that that I had disqualified myself from academia because I never, didn't do much research, never published anything. But I didn't understand that there was this professor of practice kind of role. And so that's what I am. I'm a professor of practice. It's part-time. And behind the scenes, in my mind, this is really just an extension of what I've been doing. So I've been doing leadership coaching and training for the past 3 years out on my own as a business. I started working with University of Tennessee as a coach, as a leadership coach for their entrepreneurship folks. So working with faculty and staff and coaching them on entrepreneurship. And then the dean said, hey, we've got a donor who's really interested in engineering leadership. Could you help design a program? And so I sit on the board at Penn State that has a leadership program. So I was in an advisory capacity in academia. And so I thought, okay, I'll put this program together more as like a strategy consultant. Here's what I think you should do. And then it was like, well, do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? So it's really a lot of this, the coaching, the leadership training and coaching I've been doing. I'm now just doing it inside the university. The big difference for me is more around the audience. So as I said, my business is professionals, primarily focused on PhDs, and now I'm working with undergraduates, which is different. But I will say, I've given a couple presentations to high school students. I had resisted that for a while because I'm like, I'm too old. They're not going to want to hear me. I was just like, and then I was bullied in high school, and I was like, it was all coming back to me. So I was like, no, I'm not talking to these kids. But they asked me to do it, and I gave a presentation about kind of the stuff we're talking about, and they held me for an extra hour with their questions. And I just thought, okay, maybe I can talk to younger people. And so with sort of that experience under my belt, I said, okay, yeah, I'll work with undergraduates on this. So it's the same. It's literally the same stuff. It's the same, kind of training, the same kind of coaching, tweaked a little bit for a younger audience, or I shouldn't say younger, but an audience that's earlier in their career. And we'll try it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, awesome. Well, congratulations with that, and hopefully you enjoyed as much as I do. I really love teaching, and that's something I don't think I'll ever stop doing. I always tell my wife that I'm going to retire and teach. That's what I'm going to do. Like whenever I quit working, I'll continue to teach part time until my brain doesn't work anymore. Just because it keeps me. I feel like it keeps me sharp. It keeps me paying attention to what's going on. I learned some of the cool lingo that kids are using these days to talk to my kids. But it's just in general. Plus, as a leader, I can poach good talent too. That's another perk.
That's right. That's good. Yeah, maybe you can hire some of my students. I'll have to check on that. Okay.
Yeah, it's true. But this has been a lot of fun. If you don't mind, just tell people how they can connect with you online, learn more about what you're doing, and if they want to, if they're a PhD or advancing their career and they want to get some help, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit my website, drangeliqueadams.com, and I have a blog. So I write a lot about leadership and different approaches and strategies. So I'd recommend people check there. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's my only social media, my favorite social media. So it's also Angelique Adams on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And I'll put those in the show notes too at geekleader.com so people can go there and click through. Again, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate having you on. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.